All right, good morning. And things are working perfectly just as I get up here. Isn't that awesome? Well, again, good morning. It's great to see everybody. I tell you what, one thing I love about our church, our congregation, is that we just roll with it, baby. I mean, just go with it, you know. And we can revert back to old school and do it Fred Flintstone style with the best of them and get those books out. Remember that? Remember things we had, those books? Yeah, like cavemen. It was awesome. But I tell you, it is, like I said, it's great to be, it's great to have camp in the rearview mirror. I love camp. It's great to be at Neates for a week. And one of the things that I love most about it is not only do I get to hang out with Sarah for an entire week and just get to just bask in the organization and the discipline that is Sarah longer. She's scary. But there's no cell signal there. I mean, right? None. Todd, you're like, yeah, I would like that for an entire week. No, I mean, nobody can get a hold of you if they wanted to. I mean, if there's work to be done, forget about it because you can't do it. You just can't. And so I love that part. Now, every time you drive into town for something, because you got to go to Walmart 438 times when you're at camp, but anytime you drive into Walmart, your phone's going just goes nutso. But it is great to be able to just take a week and unplug from everything and just visit God. And just you know, when everything's going crazy and we're having water balloon fights and you know, telling boys to get out of the creek and all that. And let me tell you something. If you ever want to direct a week of camp, do Boys Week. It's easy. It's all about the creek. It's all about the creek. I mean, it's just free time in the creek. It's 7:30 in the morning. Can we get in the creek? Sure, get in the creek. And so you get to, every crawdad in DeSoto was caught 17 times this week. I mean, they would bring me the crawdad, because I told them, I want to see these crawdads. They'd bring them and show them to me, and that crawdad's like, yep, he got me again. Thought I was under that rock, but nope, he got me. Yeah, it was, but yeah, they're all about the creek. They're all about, you know, it's about Tuesday, Wednesday morning. It's just, they all smell super terrible. But no, it's a great week just to sit and visit with God. And so when everybody's in bed and, you know, I'm sitting out there by the campfire just looking up and you see so many stars and just sit there and just think about, what does a relationship with God really look like? And if you've never taken that kind of time or done that kind of just prolonged just perspective analysis, I highly recommend it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Camp Neates. It could be anywhere. I mean, just go somewhere, get unplugged from everything. I mean, everything. And just have a Bible or a Bible app if you can download it, because you need no signal. And just, I tell you what, let me back up. Don't take your phone. Just bring that actual Bible. Get paper and bring it, and just think about what a relationship with God is really like. What it really entails, because so much of our experience is cast upon us. I mean, so much of our relationship with God is just sort of handed to us by the culture of the church or by the teaching or whatever. And I'm not saying any of that's bad. I'm just saying so much of it's just handed to us that we have to have time where we just sit and say, God, unpack all of these crazy thoughts I have about you. Unpack all of these doubts that I have about you. God, show me, help me, let me feel you, whatever it looks like. And let me tell you something. He shows up. Just absolutely shows up. And no, I didn't see visions or, you know, any of that or hear all, but just the understanding of peace, the understanding of joy, the understanding of the vastness that we exist within, that is our God, is truly remarkable. So this morning I want to talk to you about that very thing. Our text is out of Hebrews chapter 12, and appreciate Todd reading that for us. So since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, one of the things that that always comes back whenever I get into one of those moments, that meditative state, that alone with God time. One thing that always comes back to me is what the vastness of what we are a part of. I mean, just not only the universe is so great, and the stars and the moon and the world is so big and we're so small, but think about the vastness of the church. The generation after generation after generation after generation of people just like you and I. Maybe they dress a little bit differently. Maybe they, their diet was a little bit, different than us. Maybe their homes looked different. Maybe their mode of transportation, their daily life, maybe all those things were different throughout generations. But one thing that we are a part of is a vast history of people just like us, trying to be connected to the eternal, holy, and almighty God. And to think about how they went about connecting, how they went about reading these exact same scriptures, and what they heard and what they understood, and the fact that here we are in this small time and space, and we're continuing that same thing on, and others will hear this very story, and they will study these very words, and they'll say the same prayers, because we are part of keeping that alive on this earth. Think about that. Think about what you're a part of. Think about what you're connected to. That we are a congregation keeping the reality of the true and living God alive and well, and talked about and prayed about and displayed for a godless world to see. We are continuing in that culture, in that tradition. That's exciting. And when I read passages like this, he says, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, those who have seen, those who have come before, those who have been where you are, and maybe had it worse, maybe had it better, but they've been where you are, they've experienced what you've experienced, and they are saying, and the Bible's telling us that there are those who went before, and there are those who are going to come after, and the experience that you have right now in the middle of that is all a part of it. And the struggle that we have is very real. The struggle to be connected to that. The struggle to make sense of that. The struggle to make sense of a finite existence, trying to connect to an infinite God. An unholy existence, trying to have communion with an infinitely holy God. It is a struggle, to say the least. Am I right? It's a struggle. And then there are all these other things that we struggle with. And so the question quickly becomes, what are you struggling with? What do you struggle with? Because this sermon is one that is an umbrella over any and every single struggle. I'm not going to go through and say, hey, whether it's this or that, or try to categorize things, but just whatever it is that you're struggling with, whether it's whether it's a besetting sin, whether it's pride, whether it's where is God, whatever it is, what are you struggling with? And it's real, and God gives us tools to deal with that. And I want to briefly talk about that very thing, the tools that he gives us. He says there's this great cloud of witnesses, so let's throw off all the thing that hinders us and the sin that entangles. Let's fix our eyes on Jesus and the joy that's set before him, scorning its shame, sat down at the right hand. Consider whom endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you may grow weary and lose heart. And then he says this, in your struggle against sin, you've not yet resisted to the point of shedding your own blood. And you've forgotten that word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God's treating you as sons. There's a couple things going on here. We're going to unpack this, and we're going to get to the main thing that I want to talk about. The fact of the matter is that this passage is dealing with is that what I said is that we are finite people trying to connect to an infinite God. We are unholy, sinful creatures that are trying to connect to and understand and have a relationship with a infinitely holy and perfect God. And so there's a little tension there. I mean, just a little bit. And being facetious, there's a lot of tension there. So he's saying that there's a way that God intends for things to be done, and then there's a way that is contrary to that. And part of the struggle that we have is understanding what that means, that there's a way God thinks, or the way God set things up, this is how they ought to be, and the way that we do them. And so we struggle to define those things in a way that makes them manageable for us. We think of, and this, I'm getting to all this, because the discipline thing and all that, we think of those rules and regulations as what we should be doing, what we ought to be doing, what we better be doing in order to live up to the standard of God, so that one day when we die, we get to what? Excuse me? We think go to heaven, right? That's the whole point. Maybe we're missing something in that. Maybe, just maybe we're missing something in that. And that God is not saying, oh, well, look, Griff messed up. Let me punish him. Let me discipline him. That's not what he's talking about. He's not saying that, hey, oh, Eli, he really stepped out of line, so I'm gonna get him. And hey, Eli, don't be mad at me. I'm just disciplining you because this is the way things ought to be. The things that God is calling us to do, the holiness that he wants in our life, the set apart unto himness. That's what holiness is. We are set apart unto God. And all of the good deeds and all of the righteous living and all of that, that isn't so that we can achieve this salvation. It's so that we can have the life that God knows we can have. He's saying, be good because it's better than being bad. He's saying, don't sin because, that might feel good for a moment in our flesh, but it leads to so much more heartache. And if we just wrap our minds around the perspective of sin and righteousness, we understand there's a difference. It's not living up to something, it's living for something. I've used this example. Being faithful in marriage is so much better than being unfaithful. Because the marriage is so much better than anything we could come up with on our own. Because it's so much better to live a life of stress-free relationshiping. I mean, think about that. Think about how much more you can enjoy a relationship when you are all in, all invested, everything's great, and you don't have to worry about it. One of the things that you see online is this, and these guys here, they understand it, and younger, the mid-20s and younger 30s, they kind of get it too, is that there's this joke about, dating somebody and their phone being unlocked, and you can go through their phone, and that's like, oh, don't go through my phone, because you might find something I don't want you to see. You might see something I don't want you to see. You might be able to read a text to somebody. You know how much stress, how stress-free it is just to leave your phone laying around. You don't have to lock it up. Open book, baby. You want to read it? Anybody? I'll give it to you right now. You can look at all my pictures. It's such a stress-free, great life when you don't have to hide from anything. When you can just be. That's the life that he's saying. He goes, that's why we ought to live that way. Because it's better. It's so much better. It's better to wake up, it's like, don't be addicted to drugs or alcohol or abuse your body because it feels better. I know, you might can ingest something and have a, woo, look at me, I'm feeling it. But when that's over with, you feel so much worse. So much worse. And that's what he's saying. He's like, guys, I got a life here for you that's so much better than what you're going to. But yeah, you've got these bents and these desires and these brokennesses that pull you. But if you'll just deny those long enough, I promise you, those will stop pulling on you after a while, and you'll become a slave to this righteousness, and it's so much better. It's so much better than being a slave to sin. Because the outcome is peace and joy. And let me tell you something. There comes a point when you, and Paul talks about it, when you buffet this body, when you beat on it enough to where your muscle memory's just doing what God's called us to do, and it's so much better. It's just so much better. And so he says, look, there's a, in your struggling in sin, you've not resisted to the point of shedding your own blood. Endure hardships as discipline. Those hardships are to get us in the right direction. That discipline is to get us in the right direction so that we experience what God has in store for us, what he wants for us. Because I've told you this before, and I'll say it multiple times. You can do whatever you want to do. I mean, you can do whatever you want to do. And there are consequences for that. Some of them are temporary, and some of them are eternal. Because if you do whatever it is you want to do long enough, then we forget about God altogether. And that's when those painful consequences become eternal. But here's the point that I want to make in all this, that what are you struggling with? Hopefully, you're struggling with something. Because if you're not struggling, then we're not going in a Godward direction. Because as humans, our natural tendencies are away from him. That's the nature that we have inherited. But when we are walking towards him, it's a struggle. So what are you struggling with? And whatever it is, he says, keep it in perspective. That's what this passage is all about. And proper perspective solves so many things. Proper perspective, oops, sorry, Steve. I got outside the thing there. Proper perspective aligns everything. He says, look, in your struggle against sin, you've not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. You know what he's talking about right there? Eli, what's he talking about right there? Perspective of what? He says, you haven't struggled to the point of shedding your own blood. What mental picture is he trying to get us to understand? Of? Who was sacrificed for us? See, they get nervous when I tell them there's questions are coming, and and so, anyway. So yeah, he's talking about Jesus. He's talking about Jesus. He's saying, look, guys, you think what you're going through is tough? You think that saying no to sin or do you think that's hard? Let me tell you a story about somebody who's gone through something that's just a little bit harder than what you're going through right now. And you got that little smug, shoulder thing going. Let me just tell you something. Like when I'm talking to my kids, they're like, oh my goodness, it's so hard. Let me tell you, I love hearing about how difficult it is to get anything done, applying for colleges or getting classes and all that. I'm like, try doing that without the internet, pal. Try registering for classes through the mail. Yeah, let me tell you about some struggle. I mean, and then, whatever my struggle is, Ken can tell me about, let me tell you about taking notes on a stone tablet. All right? You got your chisel, you've got, everybody has but it is, we're like, oh, this is so hard. Like, you don't know what hard is. God's telling us, you don't know what difficult is. Let me tell you about difficult. You know, this morning in class we were talking about the song. You ever heard anybody? You know, some of you guys that are my age and beyond, you've heard Gordon Lightfoot's "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald." Great song. I mean, these two dudes right here could play it on the guitar and make it just awesome. Yep, great song. And it's the documentary song of a true to life thing where a big iron ore tanker ship, and I think it was Lake Michigan or one of the Great Lakes, as a big storm comes up and it crashes and takes on water and snow and sleet and ice and all this, and it breaks up and sinks and everyone on board dies. It's a happy, cheery little tune. And it's like 8 minutes long. I mean, the song is forever. But it's a great song. The lyrics are haunting. The tune is awesome. And there's one line in there. There's one line in there that haunts me and makes me, and every time I hear it, I think of this passage every time. And he's talking about the waves coming over the railing, and everyone's scared, and the main hatch is giving way, and ice is building up on all the lines and everything, and it's just so terrible. They can't see land. It's dark. It's just the storm's raging. And there's one line that says, "Where does the love of God go when the waves turn the minutes to hours?" Ooh. Ooh. Think about those 12 hours or so where Jesus is just getting the living snot beat out of him. I mean, and not just, you know, a boxing match, not just some MMA. No, where he was getting tortured with sticks and whips and humiliate. I mean, think about how long that had to feel. I mean, just think about that. I mean, how long that I mean, we've all been in some situation where it just seems like time is taking forever. Where it's just taking forever. And Jesus says, yeah, you think that's bad. Let me tell you a story about this one Friday. And I knew it was coming. And it wouldn't end. It just wouldn't end. And so, as we go through what we go through, and I'm not discounting the struggles that we have, but I am saying God wants us to keep a healthy perspective on what has been gone through on our behalf while we're going through the life that we live. Perspective is a powerful tool. Perspective gives us understanding. There's two things I'm going to do. I'm just going to put them up there so you can write them down. And it gives us understanding and it gives us inspiration. The first thing that perspective does for us is it helps us to understand other people. That's what this perspective gives us. One of the things that I struggle with is putting myself in their position. And so one of the things that I've come up with over the last really 3 weeks that I've been thinking about this and praying over this sermon, and it really, you know, in this past week kind of drove home this perspective, this understanding, is that this question: what would you have done? I mean, think about that. What would you have done? Now, you might be thinking about the crucifixion or that. That's not what I'm talking about. And you're going to feel like, and because when I was going through this, I felt like, well, that kind of feels like it's going a whole lot of different directions, but this sermon's not going to be very helpful unless you meditate on it this week and just think about these things. So, what would you have done? What would you have done differently? How would you have handled that? Here's my point. Let's take a couple things political, and then we'll take a couple things that are just everyday things. Let's go someplace that's just not so controversial, shall we? Let's just take a trip down to the southern border. I thought you said it was going to be not controversial. Well, okay, I lied. Struggle is real. I struggle with lying. Kidding. What would you do? You and your whole family, for generations, live in an adobe hut with a dirt floor, under under the constant threat of drug cartels killing you, stealing your children, raping them, trafficking them. I mean, the best thing that can happen to you is that they murder you quickly. I mean, let's just be real honest. What would you do? Steve, would you swim the Rio Grande against the law to get your family to a different, better place? Heck yeah. Heck yeah, I would. I would. I would do whatever I could do to help to get into a better situation. And if you say, no, I would just, well, good, teach me how to do that. Teach me how to be as strong as you would be. I mean, what would you do? We all like to lament all of this and what should be done and all and all that. What would you do differently? That person that's struggling with alcohol or heroin addiction or whatever, and what would you have done? That mother who doesn't know how to do anything but have as many children with as many different men as possible so that she can get as much government support so that she can feed herself and her family and all that. What would you have done differently if you had gone through all the things that she went through in her life? If you had seen all the things that she has seen, if you had been through and abused and neglected and thrown away or whatever, because everyone in this room, to a person, has won the birth lottery. And everything we experience is no fault of our own. I don't care if you've got a great job or a terrible job, whatever it is, we are all living like kings and queens. And if you struggle with forgiveness, if you struggle with compassion and generosity and all those things because, well, they don't deserve this or this person, how would you have done it differently? I mean, you got to go through the childhood, the abuse, everything that they went through to get them where they are. How would you have done it differently? That's perspective. That gives us an understanding. That person begging for, standing on the on-ramp or off-ramp with the sign that says anything helps. I don't know what got them there. I don't know. But if they're choosing to be there and they could do that, if that's where you have gotten in life, who am I to be superior to that? Why can't I just be compassionate? Because there is no chance I would enjoy being in that situation. Nobody wants to be there. What has happened to people along the way that get them into whatever? And a lot of it's self-inflicted, a lot of it's this, a lot of it's that. But they have a life that we know nothing about. And God's saying, hey, perspective. Perspective can generate some understanding and maybe some generosity, maybe some compassion, maybe some grace. Maybe. We have a proper perspective. The other thing it does is it inspires us. It inspires us that if Jesus can go through that on my behalf, what am I willing? I mean, because Abel's got nothing to do with it, because we're Abel because the tomb is empty. We have the ability. What we struggle with is the willingness. I know what Jesus did on my behalf. What am I willing to do on his? What am I willing to do on his? Am I willing to live a life? I mean, and the life is so much better than anything I could come up with my own. Am I willing to live that life out loud in front of other people? Am I willing to go out of my way to be the safe place for those who are in trouble to land? A couple of weeks ago, remember I talked about the Supreme Court ruling on Roe versus Wade, and I said, and I'll say it again, that was not a spiritual victory, it was a constitutional victory. The spiritual victory will only be if the church shows up and starts helping women in crisis. That will be the spiritual victory if we decide to put our money where our mouth is. I mean, because it doesn't cost a lot to make a sign that says abortion is murder, but what it does cost a lot is to be on the bedside of someone who's going through a crisis pregnancy and say, I will financially be there for you and this child. Can we do that? Because that's a spiritual victory. Not a lot of amens on that one. Amen. Amen. That's a spiritual victory. Perspective helps us to understand what other people are going through. And perspective helps us to be a little bit more inspired, a little bit more willing and able. I mean, the able part we've got. It's the willing part that perspective gives us. Knowing, think of how long those 12 hours that Friday had to have felt. And just think, hey, if he can go through that on my behalf, then this little bit of financial inconvenience is nothing. This little bit of time that I'm going to spend with this person, helping them through this bad time, this little bit of that, man, that is nothing. And then it starts to put in perspective, and then other passages come into play where he talks about, don't stand and do your good deeds in front of everyone because we start to realize if we're in a great perspective of what Jesus has gone through and what Jesus did and what God does for us, then me bragging about my little good deeds is kind of silly, isn't it? See how the whole book just sort of comes together and works together in that. Struggle is real. We have to ask ourselves, am I even struggling? Am I even working? Am I even walking in a Godward direction? And we keep the perspective that, hey, whatever we've gone through, it's nothing. And we can overcome. We have overcome. And the only thing left to do is make the decision to show up. What's your week going to look like? What is this week going to look like? Last week doesn't matter. It's over. It's gone. What's this week going to look like? What's your perspective going to be this week? Are you going to take these words, the passages that God saw fit to share with us? Are we going to meditate on these things? We're going to pray over this. Read through your notes. Go back and watch the sermon. Listen to the songs, whatever. And what's this next week going to look like? What's your perspective going to be? The choice is yours. Together we stand and as we sing.